Well, good morning. Welcome to the Alaska Center for Spiritual Living. Thank you all for coming out today, and welcome to those of you who are watching on YouTube. It's great to have you join us as well. The theme for the month of July is creativity, and the path that I've sort of taken with this is, we have the phrase that we use around here, change your thinking, change your life. And it is to creatively change that thinking so it can creatively change your life in the direction that you would like to have it go. So how does this changing your thinking relate to changing your life? Ernest Holmes wrote, "Man's conscious thought acting through law may change any condition in his experience, provided he can clearly conceive of such conditions being changed. There is no limit to the law. Limitation is not inherent in the law, but is the result of man's inability to embody the truth and to constructively use the law. Man has at his disposal, in what he calls his subjective mind, a power that is limitless. This is because he is one with the whole on the subjective side of life." That's a lot of words, and I think what it's really saying is that divine presence, however you choose to look at it, however you choose to embrace it, is always with you, and it is always for you. It is conspiring for your good at every moment. Our book for this month is called "The Sun Does Shine," and it gets its title from that another phrase that we use around here a lot, and that is that we know above these clouds the sun is indeed shining. And whether it's snowing or raining or whatever the condition is, above this weather pattern, whether it's berry or whatever, the sun is indeed shining. And that sun is always there. And it's the same principle. That divine presence is always with each and every one of us. I'll do more later, but the overall picture of this book is the story of a man by the name of Anthony Ray Hinton. And Ray Hinton was convicted wrongly of a crime in Alabama and was sentenced to death. And he spent over 30 years on death row. And the man was able to constantly and continually through those 30 years see above the clouds and know that the sun is always shining. It's a powerful, powerful book. I'll talk more about it in a minute. Important point. No matter how difficult the situation is before us, no matter how sad or angry or upset or fearful or in how much pain we may be, we have the power to change how and where we are placing the attention of our thoughts. We have the power to choose peace. We have the power to choose love. We have the power to choose compassion, kindness, joy, or any other feeling that supports our highest good. You've heard me say, I don't know whether this is really true or not, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the story. Well, all of us tell stories. All of us have stories. And sometimes they're negative stories. And sometimes we can repeat negative stories over and over because we get some sort of reward by doing that. People have compassion for us when we tell them how terrible this situation is, or we tell them how horrible that person was to me. But the more we repeat these negative stories, the more we stay trapped in the story. It is until we can move beyond the story that we can create a new experience. And so the title of my talk today is Beyond the Story. The three major points I'm going to talk about today. One, I'm going to talk about vantage point. Number two is victim or victor. And the third is the sun does shine. Changing our thinking. vantage point. There is a movie, Kevin Costner in it, and the name of that movie is Vantage Point. And it shows the same situation, exactly the same situation, from the viewpoint of multiple characters in that situation. And each of them has a different perspective on what happens in that. And the point of this is that we each have our own personal point of reference. And in order to get past the story, in order to look at it, sometimes we need to change our vantage point. In ministerial school at one of the retreats, there was a powerful, powerful play. I remember it so well, even to this day. I wish that I could get it and bring it to Anchorage. Maybe I will be able to someday. But there were 5 characters, and each was stationed around the sort of stage area, and they would rotate. And it started off with one person who felt very, very wronged in this particular situation. And then they all rotated. And a different person got up, and they talked about their experience of a different situation. Well, at about the 3rd rotation, somebody came up that was in the first person who had been wronged situation, and they were looking at it from a totally different perspective. And it went, oh my God. And what this revealed and why this was so powerful to me, I can only speak for myself, but what wakened my eyes up on this was the first time I really got a grasp, an understanding of white privilege. And it was like a glass of cold water in my face. I never knew. And I'm never going to know all of everything or be able to experience that or to know that, but I have a better appreciation for it because I've got a different vantage point. I've looked at it from a different point of view. One of the analogies, I used it over and over and over, and that's the blind monks and the elephant. And each one of them looks at the elephant from a different perspective. Some of them think that the elephant is a big leather wall, and some of them think that it's, these big ivory tusks, and each of them has a different perspective. I'm just glad that I didn't get under the tail. But they're all different, and that's how we are. We look at life from our perspective and think that's what the entire elephant is like. And that's not the essence of elephantness. We won't know that until we can open our eyes and see from a different vantage point. Point number 2 is victim or victor. Eric Butterworth once wrote, "Life does not happen to you, it happens for you." There is a documentary on Netflix, and it is called The Last Laugh. Once again, a powerful story because it deals with a topic that is so difficult to see in any other light than a total tragedy, and that's the Holocaust. And it is a comedy. And it talks about the humor of the Hebrew people that they were able to maintain through that experience. There was a movie on it, and I forget the name of the movie, but I remember the man had a small boy, and it's a Wonderful Life. Does that sound right? But there was so much more than that, and it was so much more than gallows humor as well. It was the ability to see once again above those clouds, the ability to know that on top of the clouds there is sun. And we may look at that as totally inappropriate humor, but there is a message to it as well. And that is that eternal presence, that infinite knowledge, that infinite love is always there in every situation. Morgan Freeman once said this about racism: "If we want to end racism, we need to stop talking about it. And I think there's something to that. If we take our attention away from that which we don't want, we take our attention away from that which is not part of the experience that we desire, we can begin to create something new and something better. And it's not that we're going to deny it. It absolutely exists, but we don't need to give it any energy. And yet sometimes we live in the past. We do things the way, that it's always been done. As most of you know, I spent a lot of time in the electrical industry selling electrical stuff, and we had a product, I don't even remember the catalog number. It was a 941 Rayco. And it was a metal switcher receptacle box. And it came with nails on it so that, building houses, you could just get it, wham, wham, in, pull a Romex in, and you're good to go. And it was a metal box. And one day, traveling salesman came through, and he had a better idea. He had a better mousetrap, and that was a fiberglass box. Well, people didn't want to try that right away. They weren't too sure about this fiberglass. Is it going to be as good as metal? Is it going to fall apart? And it was a fraction of the cost, but I don't know. And we got what that time was the largest residential contractor in Anchorage, and we were hoping to maybe sell a few hundred of these boxes. And we went out and did a dog and pony show, and fire rating. I was really concerned about fire. Well, we just happened to have fire ratings and approval from the fire marshals, and it was all good to go. And he shook his head. I think I'll try it. Oh, great. How many would you like? I think I'll start with 10,000 of these, 20,000 of these, and our eyes were just filled. But he was able to look at it from a different perspective. He was able to look at it from a new and different way. If you went to the doctor, if you got a big cut on your leg, and you went to the doctor, and the doctor took a look at it. Whoa, we're going to have to bandage that up. Let me take a look at it. Ooh, that's not looking so good. And then he went over to his little cabinet, and he got out a little bottle and came in, and he started putting maggots into your cut. I don't think you'd care for that. What in the world? Well, 100 years ago, that's how they handled big cuts, is they put maggots in there, because the maggots would eat the dead flesh and it would actually clean the wound and do it. Well, we've got better ways of doing that today. You would fire your doctor and go to somebody that was going to give you some antibiotics, sew it up, do whatever needed to be done. You wouldn't count on the maggots to do it. And yet sometimes in our spiritual world, in our life, and the things that we do, we're putting maggots on the problems in our life, and there are better ways to do it. Thomas Troward, good old Thomas Troward, wrote, "Relying on the maxim that principle is not bound by precedent, we should not limit our expectations of the future. And if our speculations lead us to the conclusion that we have reached a point where we are not only able but also required by the law of our own being to take a more active part in our personal evolution than heretofore, this discovery will afford us a new outlook upon life and widen our horizons with fresh interests and brightening hopes." No more maggots. Third point is the sun does shine. I initially had a kind of a précis of this book, and I had some conclusions that I drew and whatnot, but I changed all that late last night. Sometimes I do that. Ray Hinton, Alabama, prison. Death row. They wouldn't execute him as long as there was an appeal going. But he was locked into a system that didn't ever let him out. It was a giant catch-22. he was convicted on the basis of bogus information, on out and out lies, on everything else. On the night of the murder that he was accused of, he was at work. He was actually locked into a facility. It had 15-foot fences with razor wire on the top. It had cameras. He was in the view of the camera at one point, and there was a while he was not in that view, but he was in that view again. A short time later. The murder occurred over 15 miles away. He would have had to have somehow escaped over this 15-foot fence, driven, committed the murder, and got back, and he couldn't have possibly done that in the amount of time because when he was actually seen on the thing. In addition, they went to his house and they found his mother's old .38, and it happened to be a .38 that had killed the guy. And they somehow came up with the ballistics. Even when they confiscated the gun from the mother's house, the detective that did blew on it and dust came out. I said, well, this thing hadn't been fired in 20 years. And yet they used that information to convict him. And I've only listed a couple of the wrongs that the man suffered. Perhaps the largest one, though, is that his cell was only 30 feet from the death chamber. And over that amount of time, 54 men were sent to their death. And they walked right past his cell and were strapped into, they call it the yellow mama, the electric chair, and were electrocuted. And only 30 feet away, he had to endure the smell of cooked human flesh for days after the electrocution. And all this time knowing that he could be next. It's a powerful book, and I think I'm going to write Anthony Ray Hinton and ask him if he'll come to Alaska, even though we don't have a death penalty, and ask him to talk to us about what he did to survive this time. I picked 4 quotations, and I'll talk about how they affected me. He wrote, "Everything, I realized, is a choice. And spending your days waiting to die is no way to live." Spending your life waiting to die is no way to live. It says to me that he can see beyond those clouds. And he can know that that sun is shining. And even though those clouds are very, very real, and there may be rain, and that rain may be needed, I don't know, to knock down the smoke or to water the grass or whatever it is. But above those clouds, the sun is shining. And that never changes. The presence of God in Ray Hinton's life never varied. Quote number 2, "No baby is born a murderer. No toddler dreams of being on death row someday. Every killer on death row was taught to be a killer. By parents, by a system, by the brutality of another brutalized person, but no one was born a killer." Most of the people on death row in there with him were accused of murder. Statistics show that 1 in 10 are wrongfully accused. That we execute, 1 out of every 10 we execute is innocent. Hurt people hurt people. And when we can take away our judgments and our need for whatever it is, we can take away our need for vengeance. Quote number 3, "We need to think about the fact that we are all more than the worst thing that we have done." None of us are perfect. We've all done things that our world considers wrong, we have to remember the fact that none of us are that worst thing that we've done. That we are all more than the worst thing that we have ever done. There was a horrible murder in Alabama. A white man had brutally murdered a black man. Racist, horrible murder. And he ended up just a couple cells down from Ray Hinton. And over a period of time, the two began to see each other not as black and white, as right and wrong, as monster and victim, but as human beings. And before he was executed, this man proclaimed that Ray Hinton was his best friend. And he had learned more about life from Ray Hinton than anything else. And you see, he was that product of a hateful existence. Quote number 4. I was born with the same gift from God that we are all born with. The impulse to reach out and lessen the suffering of another human being. It was a gift, and we each had a choice whether to use this gift or not. One of the things that Ray Hinton did was to start a book club on death row. Because of his exemplary behavior, the warden would give Ray an audience. And the warden listened to Ray when Ray told him the importance that could come from having a book club. And he allowed these men on death row to have a few books and to trade them back and forth and to meet once a month in the library for 1 hour to talk about the book. Well, their meetings took place in the library, but they can hear each other, couldn't never see each other, but they could hear each other through the halls, and the discussions of these books would go on well into the night. And it was cut across all lines. Some men could barely read. Others grasped the fine points quickly. But Ray Hinton was able to, in the middle of death row, do something that brightened someone else's day, that made that existence a little bit better. And how Jenna, the song, and I have the power to change my life. I have the power to brighten someone's darkest night. You do a wonderful job of somehow picking the music that so much matches what I have to say. And so we can move beyond the story. We can let the story fall aside, and we can see above the clouds and see to that sun that's shining above. And so it is with that awareness that I ask my colleagues of practitioners to join me in just surrounding our congregation in love, to just know that each and every one of us are beloved children of the Most High. Each one of us carries within us divine DNA. We are all made of God. We are all those perfect little godlings. And yes, we make mistakes. But we are not punished for our mistakes. We're punished by our mistakes. And we learn quickly. We know that our thoughts become things. We know that who we are in this world never changes. And so as we face the problems of life, and we all have problems in life, as we face those problems and we face those opportunities, as we face life itself, we can know that the conditions are temporary, that the thing that is permanent is God's love. And so as we look at situations where maybe we don't have enough, there's more month than there is paycheck, we can simply know that we live in an abundant world. And that as we open ourselves up, we can experience the very abundance of God. We know that we face health challenges. My goodness, we all face health challenges. And we can know that we don't have to put the maggots in any longer, that there are an infinite number of ways that we can heal, that we can grow, that we can be better. That there is deep within each of us a blueprint of perfection. There is a DNA that allows for an instant healing. And that healing may not look like what we want it to, but it's how we perceive it. When we can look at a healing from a different vantage point, we can then experience a true healing of any disease. And we know that more than anything else, we are beings of love. We have been created in the image and likeness of an infinite love. And that infinite love is part of each and every one of us. And even though we have disagreements, we can have different political views, we can have all kinds of things at work relationships, romantic relationships, family relationships. It makes no difference, because the thing that is constant, that never changes in any way, is that we are beings of love, infinite God's love. And if we can just get our own egos out of the way, we can allow that God's love to embrace each of us. And so right here, right now, I am calling for each of us to embrace God's love. Each of us to be the best that we can be. Each of us to see above the clouds and bask in the light of the sun. The sun does shine. And so we give thanks. We give thanks for our awareness of that sun. We give thanks for our awareness of the power and the presence of God. And now we can just step back and let it go and know that that power, that presence is guiding us along the way. That the outcome is sure to be perfect. So we let it go, we let it be, and so it is.